wanna, okay, I've got it, but I wanna know where I can let you record.
Good.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ramona Speaks the Other Truth on HooDoo Mondays with my guest and co-host, Cat Yronwode. Hello, Cat.
Hi, nice to be here again. I always love being a guest on your show.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Today I'd like to talk about how people that are serious about herbal knowledge, how they can take it to the next level and the importance of that. Also, I'd like to talk about the significance of knowing your herbs and being able to make medicines and salves, etc. If we can get it in to this time slot, because it's so much information and a lot of people aren't aware of the significance of it. And so I'm going to turn this over to you. And let's start with the history of herbal medicine and working with herbs.
All right. First of all, I want to say that many people who listen to shows like Ramona Speaks the Other Truth or the Lucky Mojo HooDoo Rootwork Hour, which I host, come to herbal work through their interest in herbal magic. Others come through their interest in herbal medicine. And where we kind of live is on that intersection between herbal magic and herbal medicine. Most tribal cultures use the same word for magic as they use for medicine. And this is very common that the wise people, whether they are wise men or wise women, the wise ones of a tribal or village culture know which local plants produce which medical or physiological results, and also which magical results, and they're usually related.
Wow.
So when people come to herb magic, they're looking for a result in terms of change in a situation. I want a love herb to make my love life better, or I want a money herb so I can go out and gamble and win, whatever it may be like that, that they're looking for. If they come to herbs through medical needs, they would say, I feel sick to my stomach. And the wise person would say, well, you ate something wrong. Let's either give you a laxative or we're going to give you something to make you vomit. We're just going to clean out your system. We're going to give you a cleanse. Or if they diagnose that as something that will soon be over, we're going to give you something soothing. You ate something that was irritating. So the wise person knows how to diagnose and then knows the medical actions of the plants, whether they are plants that will make you sweat or plants that will cool you down, plants that will soothe a wound by providing a kind of a coating that can be used under a bandage for healing. Those ideas are known by the wise herbalists. So in talking about magic, a plant that provides that herbal soothing balm, like Althea, is used in magical spells to provide a soothing balm in social situations, family situations, and love situations. But it wouldn't be used for gambling luck because it's not about gambling luck. So some herbs are selected for magical use based on their medical effect on the body, and some are selected for magical use due to their appearance, like the 5-finger root called salad root or lucky hand root or helping hand root. Has many different names. That has little fingers on it. That's used to grab things, but it's also used by musicians to make them play better. It's used for all the work of your 5 fingers, and that's based on appearance, because actually, as far as medicine, it just simply will make a soothing gruel or food. It's nothing spectacularly medical. It's somewhat edible.
Okay.
So some of the plants are used based on their appearance, and some used based on their medical use when it comes to magic. But medically, they're all used based on their effects on the body, with a few exceptions. There are some plants that have a long historical magical use based on their appearance, which then becomes integrated into their medical use, even though modern scientific herbalism might say they're ineffective, but we include them as non-changing or non-affecting herbs because they have such a reputation magically, if that person is an herbalist of the magical sort. So there's a lot of different ideas that go into herbal medicine and herbal magic. So that was a kind of a long introduction, and I didn't actually answer your question.
Well, yeah, you know, there is a different attitude or energy between the two, I think. Would you agree? Like,
well, I would say that originally they were blended much more
blended?
than they are now.
Okay.
And now there is a difference, and it's because of what happened legally. This is fairly recent, that the 19th century, when the idea of chemistry and chemical analysis of plants really kind of took off, and they would isolate different substances within a plant. Oh, it contains this gum or this resin or this fragrance, or it has this molecule, which we don't know what it does. And they'd give the molecule to a mouse or something, and they'd say, oh, look, the mouse is running around like it's hyper, or no, the mouse has gone to sleep. And then they would test it, and they would isolate these things. This is when plants like coca, which people chew to get energy, get separated out into cocaine, which is like this highly addictive, toxic drug. And plants like poppies, which were used to suppress coughing and also to give you a good night's sleep so that you don't cough, and also could be used to give you a sleep if you had other, pain or something like that. It was separated out into heroin and into morphine, and all of these highly concentrated drugs. And then some of the drugs, they stopped using the plant to make it. They just said, oh, we can just put these chemicals together and make it. And so that's what I call the white powders and white pills. So some herbalists followed down that line, whereas other herbalists said, no, we're really interested in the magical uses. But the law stepped in and decided that the people, now this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but it's the truth, and everybody knows it who has ever read the history of herbal medicine. And I'd like to recommend to you at this point the man named Joseph Mayer, and his last name is spelled M-E-Y-E-R. He wrote a book. He lived through this, and he wrote a book about how the US government tried to put an end to herbal medicine by making it illegal. And this extended from the end of the 19th century, when they began to call herbal medicine a fraud and quack medicine. They'd say, oh, this is quack medicine. But it wasn't. It was real medicine. And the reason why was these larger companies began buying up the herb suppliers. You go into a pharmacy in those days and you'd buy a package of herbs, and it would tell you the dose. Put so much in a glass of water, boil it or steep it, or put it in alcohol and let it steep, depending on what you were extracting from it and how it was used. And you could also buy the ready-made extractions, like a blend of herbs, like Dr. Kilmer's swamp root, which was a diuretic for the kidneys. It prevented kidney stones. And because kidneys were involved in other functions, it also was just a kidney tonic. And it was made with a combination of, 13 or more, or maybe 17 different herbs that had an acted upon the liver and the kidney. And it was declared to be quack, unsuitable. Now, what did they substitute? They substituted a pill that they could extract all this stuff together, put it in a pill, and the pill or the tablet or the capsule became the quote trusted unquote medicine, because it came out of a laboratory instead of swamp root, which literally came out of the swamps. Now, anybody could copy swamp root because he gave the ingredients on it, starting with the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. You had to list the ingredients. And you found out that Dr. Kilmer had found diuretics and liver tonics from all around the world. They weren't only from the swamps of Eastern US. He had brought in things from other countries that were used there. He had done his research, and they're wonderful herbs, but it was declared a quack remedy, and it was parodied, and people made fun of it. In the comics, there was something called Kickapoo Joy Juice.
Yeah.
And it was, the idea was, ha ha, Native Americans, they're so funny. They use these stupid things. And it's all about the alcohol. And people would say it's all about the alcohol. Well, it was an alcoholic extract, but extracting an herbal essence in alcohol is a very time-honored way to do it. And it's not that, oh, it got you drunk and you didn't feel any pain. It still was a diuretic, and it still eased lower back pain caused by kidney pain. So these lies that we're told about very trusted herbal remedies continue to this day. If you go to eBay right now and want to buy a swamp root almanac, or you want to buy an antique vintage bottle of swamp root tonic, or even some with the tonic in it, it'll be listed under quack medicine, but it's not quack medicine, it's just straight up herbal medicine. So that's part of why the separation happened. Some of the medical herbalists felt they were being tainted with this idea of quackery, and they felt they were being tainted by being, oh God, they're superstitious and they do magic. So they divorced themselves from magic.
And that I've noticed started up again about 5-6 years ago, when there was a big upsurge in what they're calling now holistic medicine.
Yes.
And they really, the American Medical Association really started hammering those particular doctors who were at the forefront of that movement. And then it went into conspiracy theory type things, when all of a sudden, they just started dropping dead. Because I'd look, that's what was going around, and that's what drew my attention to it. So there does seem to be a movement at a much higher level to dissuade people from using the herbs and earth like they used to do in the old days. I think that's absolutely right.
I agree. And I'm going to give one example that really hits home to a lot of people. So cannabis is a plant that has many uses. You can use the fiber to make rope and hemp, and the seeds are very nutritious. They're high in protein. And the seeds of cannabis were traditionally used in bird seed for pet birds, particularly canaries. They need a high protein diet in order to sing well. And I have old packaging of bird seed that has cannabis seeds as one of the ingredients. Cannabis also is a anxiety reliever. It's a pain reliever, and it's particularly good for chronic pain. As we all know, you can make it into a salve, you can make it into something you eat, or you can smoke it. And there was this thing that happened during World War I, where rope was needed for sailing ships. They had ships that had big ropes on them in those days. Now, of course, everything's done a little differently. And because of World War I, there was difficulties with the supply lines. Where are we going to get rope from? So the US government promoted the growing of cannabis, or hemp, low THC hemp, all over the Midwest. It'll grow any place where corn will grow or where wheat will grow. And it was grown, it was like a big patriotic national thing. Grow all this hemp, grow this hemp. We need it for the war effort. Well, when the war effort stopped, it turned out that a lot of people found out that that hemp, although it was low THC, you could smoke it and get stoned. Well, right after World War I, the temperance movement kind of took off. Women got the right to vote, and women decided alcohol was ruining people's families. And so they passed the Volstead Act. The Volstead Act was what caused alcohol to become illegal. And more people began to smoke cannabis because it was everywhere. Everywhere you went, it was growing in the fields. Even though the war effort stopped and they replanted those fields with corn, the cannabis grew in the ditches. It was called ditchweed. And you could smoke it and get high. You might have to smoke a whole joint to get high rather than, than a puff. But, it was fine. It wasn't bad stuff at all. Maybe you had to smoke 2 joints if it was very low THC. So what? You would still get stoned, or you could make it into tea or concentrate it or make hashish out of it and make, hash brownies out of the very lowest stuff. So that became popular. So it was associated with Black people and Mexicans. They had discovered how it worked. They knew about it and they used it. So did Indians, people from India. And it was decided that it was exotic and that it was ruining people. And there was a lot of propaganda put out in the 30s when still alcohol was illegal and more people smoking cannabis. They began to put out propaganda films like Reefer Madness.
Yeah, I remember that.
Part of the idea was that these white girls would be turned into sex trafficked prostitutes by Black people or Mexicans if they were allowed to smoke. It was just this whole propaganda thing, and people fell for it. And in 1935, cannabis was deemed illegal. An entire plant was deemed illegal. But what really got interesting to me, because my parents had an antiquarian bookstore and I was studying botany, modern books on botany wouldn't even show what cannabis looked like. It would describe it. It would be there in the key out system, how to find what your plant is, but it wouldn't show it. It wouldn't show it, except they would say, it's hemp that grows in India. But I was like in Illinois and it was growing everywhere, right? Yeah. So they decided, it's like, how can you make a plant illegal? Well, now
a weed, especially, because it was a weed.
A weed, exactly. So now here we get to the idea of multiply. That was so dramatic. And when they finally legalized it again after years and years, and by the way, I went to jail for growing it and I did my time. So I was in that fight and I have a lot of stories to tell about it, but that's not my point. I'm not a big weed user myself, but it was a good way to make money. And I believe that no plant should be made illegal.
That's right.
That's just one example that most people know. But now try multiplying that by plant after plant after plant, sassafras and comfrey and all of these
poppy seeds.
Poppy seeds. Oh my God, yes. All of these plants, one after another, these plants become illegal. Lies were told by botanists to try to preserve plants. California poppy is Echeveria poppy. We were told in the botany books that I had that unlike opium poppy, unlike the other poppies, California poppies contain no opium. And it said this in print. But if you went and read a book on Native American lore, there was a book called Native Uses for Indigenous Uses for Native Plants. I think it was a book I had. Open it up, and it said California poppy. That if you have a toothache, you chew up the poppy and you pack it in around the tooth. And I'm like, well, why would you do that if there was no opium in it? That didn't make no sense. Then they made it illegal to pick California poppies. These are our state flower. You must never pick them. They're sacred to us as our state flower. No, they didn't want junkies coming out of Los Angeles and picking all the California poppies and brewing it down into opium, which you can do. And it is filled with opium. So they lied to people. And meanwhile, of course, you're supposed to get heroin on the streets because there's money to be made in that. So now with starting with the hippie movement, and then there was another recrudescence of it, another revival of it, the holistic healing. people began to talk about these stuff. But I still know older people who say, no, there's no opium in California poppies. It's the only poppy that has no opium. Bull. Not only that, there's opium in lettuce. There's opium in lettuce. Everyone knows it who's a botanist, but they don't want to tell you that. But if you read your children's books from the 19th century, before all of this happened, or from the early 20th century, if you read like the story of Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, the Beatrix Potter books, she talks about in Peter Rabbit, he goes into the garden and he eats lettuce and he falls asleep because it is so soporific. So she knew it. She was an honest botanist, but all of these truths have been hidden from people. So yeah, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy.
And it's a conspiracy because pharmaceutical companies have gotten so huge.
That's right.
And the thing about it is, yeah, they can synthesize a lot of things. But like you said, I mean, how can you make a plant illegal, a weed illegal?
I know.
You know, because it grows. Nobody had to invent it.
That's right.
You know, it's not something that they invented or discovered in a laboratory. These are things that come from the earth and are natural to the earth.
That's right.
And they make it harder and harder to get.
Now I'm gonna tell you another thing. And again, this is not about a conspiracy theory, but in a way it is. So herb growing used to be the provenance of people who were rural people. There were people who would collect herbs. They're called wildcrafters. And there are people who would grow herbs. And this man I mentioned before, Joseph Mayer, was the first person who pioneered the growing of wild herbs in a semi-domesticated situation where he would, not planting them out in rows necessarily. If they needed the shades of woods, he'd grow them under trees, but he'd plow with a horse between, around and amongst, and he'd put these rows in following the natural lines of the land. He also grew them in beds. And he, of course, purchased from other wildcrafters and other growers. This was a system of moving herbs into commerce, these growers. And it existed well into the 90s. When I started Lucky Mojo, I had my growers out in Indiana, my growers in Illinois. That's where they often would grow them because it's a good soil and they can grow plants from the South. They have a long enough growing season. They can grow HooDoo style Southern plants. Some of them would come up from Mexico because they had grown in the deeper South, like Georgia, can't be grown in Illinois, but they can be grown around the Gulf of Mexico and down into Central America. So we had our sources. And there were also traditional European sources. For example, rosebuds. In Morocco, rosebuds have traditionally been grown for use in making potpourris. And these are not used for perfume. That's a different species of rose, different variety of the species Rosa damascena or the Bulgarian rose. These were little roses that made a beautiful rosebud that stayed tight and was bright pink. And there were acres and acres of these rosebud fields in Morocco. And we got our roses from Morocco and everyone loved them. They were just gorgeous. Well, the Chinese came in. Now the Chinese came in with a lot of things in the 90s. They began to make everything out of plastic, cheap. Walmart, Target, those, Kmart, everything filled up with stuff from China. And we know that they have pretty much destroyed our economy and we're on the ropes. They're winning the economic war against us. But among other things, China is very vast and they have southern China has a nice California coastal climate. They can grow very nice things like roses there. Up north, they can grow the more northerly plants that come out of Northern Europe, up toward the Mongolian area. So China decided to corner the herb market in natural herbs. And they did it by subsidizing their own growers and undercutting the prices.
Yeah.
So they first moved in with culinary herbs. They moved in with potpourri herbs. They moved in with perfumery herbs that are used to make essential oils. They pretty much destroyed the local indigenous herbal growers in India, in Morocco, Yemen, which is where dragon's blood incense is native. They started planting it, growing it in China. And all of this stuff, the prices, it was always the price point. Wow, I could get this for 10% less. I'll buy the Chinese version.
Right.
Then COVID struck. And now we can't get those herbs from China. But in the meantime, those Moroccan herb growers, they were getting a good price per pound. By the time it came down the stream, I mean, I don't know what they got in Morocco, but by the time it came down the stream, it was so much a pound in America. And the Chinese undercut them by $5 a pound. And you're like, my God, where is all this roses coming? The Moroccans just plowed under the rose bushes because it was no longer profitable. They grew something else. And then the Chinese got greedy and they raised the prices. It's now higher than it was from Morocco. And then COVID came in, and there was a point of a year where you couldn't get rosebuds at all because everything had been concentrated in the hands of these monopolistic herb suppliers. So the herb medicine world is facing shortages in many, many herbs, and particularly herbs that have no culinary value. They were never grown in China because there was no market for them culinarily. There's no market for them medically as a raw material, what's called crude drug, to make a pharmaceutical product. They might only have a magical meaning. And I'm going to give you one example, devil shoestrings. Devil shoestrings. It's an American plant that has a long, long meaning in African-American folk magic of tying up the devil shoestrings. It's like you use it for protection. It can be used for good luck. It can be used as a tonic. It can be put 9 devil shoestrings, tie them together, put them into a bottle of, tie them in a little bundle, slip it into a bottle of whiskey, and then you let it sit for a month, and then you drink a teaspoon every morning for protection and luck. Very old recipe. I actually have a photo that I just bought recently, blew my mind. It was on a site that sells vintage newspaper photos, the original photos, because all these newspapers are digitizing and they don't want their old photos. They're just tearing them down. Newspapers are going out of business. And I found a photo from 1964 of an African-American woman with a big old galvanized wash tub. You know what I'm talking about? A big old circular, like you'd use for watering horses, right? Completely filled with devil shoestrings roots. And she's got bundles of them tied up with string that she sells, probably, just buy the bundle. It looks like a big bundle of asparagus. And she's got a bottle, it's like a demijohn type bottle or crockery bottle. And it's got aluminum foil over the top. And she's dressed 1964 is my guess, from her hairdo, her style. And she's somewhere in Texas. And that's all I know. This photo came from Texas. Oh yeah. And I'm like, and it even has her name on it. I believe her name was Miss Ruby Lake. Or no, Ruby Luke. Ruby Luke. That was her name, Ruby Luke. And there was no explanation. And didn't say it was devil shoestring, but I recognized it. So she was supplying magical herb hoodoo shops, you see. Nowadays, who's doing it? Nobody's doing it. It's very hard to find some of these herbs. So I look at this, I want to preserve this knowledge, both magically and medically. And it's very hard to get the herbs that are not medical. Now, the herbs that are medical, you can get pretty well because there are supply chains. But what's happened in the last few years, once COVID started and the Chinese stuff was just the supply lines were broken, people are starting to grow the herbs again themselves. Mm-hmm. And I have one friend, shout out to Cousin Joshua. I don't know if you know his name. Cousin Joshua Saunders is his last name. He's a student of my course in hoodoo herbology, but he's also growing these herbs for medical uses. I hope we're going to see more of Cousin Joshua. We see him in the Lucky Mojo Hoodoo Root Work Hour. He's always in the chat. He's one of the few. He wants to take on. He's in the American South. He wants to take on that role of growing those herbs and providing real herbs.
Ooh, maybe he and I can get together because
You
I've
get
got
him
the
on your,
land.
yeah, get him on your show. He's a wonderful man. I hope to see him in HooDoo Psychics and in the Association of Independent Readers and Root Workers, AIR. I hope to see him join those. He's just he has a full-time job doing something else too, by the way. And he's good at what he does, but this is his passion.
Yeah.
And there are others. There are other people who are really into the herbalism. Now, I could name you some people who have taught this. You want to get somebody who's a little middle-aged or older because they've been around, they've been through the mill. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I call them seasoned.
Seasoned. Yeah, wise women and wise
Right.
men. There are books, many of these books are published in small editions or print on demand. There are also websites that keep older books available in digitized form. And the best one is called botanic.com. And there are amazing books there at botanic.com that came out before the making of herbs illegal.
Okay.
And among them, one of the best books is Mrs. Maud Greaves' book is called A Modern Herbal. And it's
Mauve greens.
Maud Grieve, I'll spell it.
Okay.
It says Mrs. M, like the letter M, period. But her name was Maud, M-A-U-D-E.
Okay.
And her last name is Grieve. And let's just see if I can find it here.
Grieve.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find with the internet is being really awful here.
Maud Grieve.
Mrs. Grieve.
I found her.
Yeah. And
oh, wow.
This book, there's a Wikipedia article on her, Maud Grieve. And she wrote it. I'm sorry, I said botanic.com. I'm wrong. It's botanical.com. Please correct me there.
Okay.
Botanical.
Okay, got
it.
If
you go there, her entire book, A Modern Herbal by Mrs. M. Grieve, is online at botanical.com. And
oh my God, it sure is.
The whole book. And this has been online for a long time. I mean, 1995 is when it first went online. And everybody should have this. This book is amazing. I think everyone should own the book too. It was originally published in one volume, and then it was published in 2 paperback volumes or 2 hardcovers, which they show there because it was so big and fat that you couldn't put out a paperback without it cracking the spine. So it was reprinted in 2 volumes. I have the 1 volume, I have the 2 volume, whatever you want. But what's interesting about her book is it was written in 1932. So she was actually fighting against the making of plant medicine illegal. And she gave every bit of history she could find. She researched every other book, and she tells you so-and-so says such and such, and this and that and the other. She found all the chemical analyses that were being done by modern pharmaceutical companies in their attempt to make herbs obsolete. And she would say, this herb contains, for every pound, 10 grains of this compound or whatever, so she was able to back engineer those medicines. She also gave the folklore, and she talks about, in Trinidad, this is used magically, or wherever it might be. And it is amazing. If you just pick one plant, like, I was going to the letter A, and I'm going to, let's just say, alkanet, okay, alkanet. And she gives the botanical name, she gives the medicinal action and its use. This book will teach you everything. There's no other book ever been like it, and no book bothers to replace it. And she tells you that it's used, she gives you all the pseudonyms, and Cusa, Dyer's bug loss, Spanish bug loss, orcanet. She shows you a picture of it. yeah, this book was my teacher, Maud Green.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
You can buy it still online, and I like having both the online version and the book version, because sometimes the book version is faster. I just grab it and flip through it. It's just easier. But many people would prefer it in digital form. Now, there are other books like this that are kept at other people's sites, other old books, and there's a woman called Henriette Kress. So it's HenrieTTE, Henriette, and her last name Kress, Kress. And she has a place site called Henriette's Herbal homepage. And it's Henriette's, with no apostrophe, henriettes-herb.com. And if you go to Henriette's Herbal homepage, I've known her since the 90s. She is from Finland, I believe. And since 1995. And she is in Helsinki, Finland, but she speaks English perfectly, and she publishes books in English. And she has published some of the best books on herbs. And she also keeps older books on her site. If you get to her site, henriettes-herb.com, you'll see a site menu on the left, and it says classic texts. If you click that, this is pretty much every other book, not Maud Greaves' book, because why duplicate? She has King's American Eclectic Dispensary and King's American Dispensary. These are amazing books that are used in American medicine. She has, oh my gosh, there's so many of them. It's just unbelievable what she's got here. Scudder's Specific Medication and Specific Medicines, which are all herbs. These are not, they're all herbs. So again, I recommend her site. She's excellent at this. Cook's Physio-Medical Dispensary. Now, these books were used by Maud Greaves. So in a way, people say, well, let's just go to Greaves directly. But this is the sources that Greaves used. W. Barton's 1818 book, Vegetable Materia Medica of the US. She's got all of this stuff here. Bigelow's 1817 American Medical Botany. This is what we need, you see. This is the stuff we need.
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I had looked upon a book, and I can't find it anywhere. It would go through the vegetables and things like that, and the vitamin content of each, and what it was good for in healing and stuff like that. I think we've talked about it before. I cannot remember the name of it. I found it in an old bookstore, but that book, like I could find the food source, natural, of like in greens, the highest concentrate of vitamin A,
Oh, yes.
vitamin E, and what combinations of these things that you need for a particular illness, which I actually got rid of parvo in one of the dogs.
Wow.
So I can't find that book. I can't even remember. I thought it was A to Z book of nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an old book found in Berkeley at that used bookstore on Ashby.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't been able to find it.
Oh, I wish I knew what it was.
Yeah.
I really like the books of Joseph and Clarence Mayer. So Joseph Mayer was the founder of the Indiana Botanic Gardens, and he was the one who pioneered growing wild herbs in a semi-domestic setting. His son, Clarence, was a very talented artist and illustrated his books and catalogs. And Clarence wrote a number of books. And Joseph's grandson, who was Clarence's nephew, kept the books in print for a long time under the imprint Mayer Books, all like it was one word, Meyerbooks. You can look up Mayer Books. And Clarence wrote some amazing books. One's called Herbal Aphrodisiacs. Another one is just a book on onions and garlic. There's another one called Vegetable Medicines. And this was an idea of medications that used common plants. And there's another book by Clarence Mayer called Old Ways Rediscovered that everybody should have. I teach my own students to get these books. I have a Patreon stream, and not trying to promote like, hey, subscribe on Patreon, but I have tiers. You know how you have tiers at Patreon where you give bigger and bigger gifts the more money they give. Well, the largest, highest tier I have at Patreon, they get a priority mailbox every month filled with books and things. And I actually get these books for them and give them the books by Clarence Mayer. And I recommend that everybody do this. The Herbalist Almanac by Clarence Mayer is a collection of 50 years of articles that he wrote for his father's catalog. And Old Ways Rediscovered. But the best book, the very best book that Clarence Mayer wrote is called American Folk Medicine. And this is his collection of just American stuff. It's not from Europe. It's not from the 15th century. It's not from ancient Roman sources. This is American folk medicine that he collected during his lifetime from American folk medical practitioners. The Herbalist Almanac really is a cut and paste job of the articles from the Almanac, because the Almanac every year gave you the moon signs and, you know, advertisements. And so it's kind of random. He boiled it down into American folk medicine. There's another book called Herbal Recipes by Clarence Mayer, which is a small pamphlet-y type book. Again, really good recipes for how to make the medicines. So he also did a book called Sachets, Potpourri, and Incense. This is a recipe book on how to make sachets and potpourri and incense for pleasure and for magic. And his book on onion, condiment, nutrient, and medicine is just a dive deep into one plant, onion. It's really, his stuff is really good. And I recommend that everybody have them all. The onion book is a little like, you know, kind of like, well, onion's a whole book. But once you get to like his style of writing, you're going to want it anyway. So these are my favorite books. The other book that goes with them that he built off is his father's book, Joseph Mayer, The Herbalist. Not the same as his book, The Herbalist Almanac. And The Herbalist is you can buy old editions of it. You can buy new editions.
Right.
I like the hardcover editions with the white cover, comes in paperback. I buy it all the time. I give it to my students. It's not very expensive. You can find used copies everywhere. And you want the oldest editions, which are just by Joseph, are not as illustrated. Once Clarence, who was an artist, came back from Paris where he was studying art and began to illustrate these, the whole things opened up. But he always, until his father died in 1951, they were always said as by his father, but he helped. So The Herbalist by Joseph Mayer, you can see many, many, many copies of it. Get yourself a cheap copy. It's easy to find. And
yeah, I see one here on Amazon.
sure. Now, the thing about it was then David kept them in print for years. And now David is getting older. He's older than me and you. And I don't think they're keeping it in print anymore. But there's nothing quite like The Herbalist. It's really good. It also has sections in it about folk magic as well as folk medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I published a little book myself on this topic, which is a little $9, you know, this is for the person who's like, herbal medicine, what? Right?
Right.
So I found a book that came out in the 40s called This Amazing Book Opens the Door to Better Health. That was its title. And I loved it because it was so little and it was so compressed. And it was similar to Moncrief. It was similar to Nichols Botanical. Oh, that's another one. Nichols Botanical Ready Reference. I'll get back to that. But this amazing book, I retypeset it and I added to it a little bit. It's based on what's called the Nichols system. Now, Nichols, J.M. Nichols, was a guy who supplied herbs to pharmacists in the 1880s, 1890s. And many of the pharmacists were German. It was a traditional German and German-speaking Jewish people set up pharmacies. Very few Black people were allowed to own pharmacies in those days. The first one who I know of was Dr. E.P. Reed in Virginia, who then moved to Lawnside, New Jersey, and then set up a pharmacy in Philadelphia. But most Black ghettos were served by Jewish pharmacists because white people didn't want Jews to be pharmacists because they feared that they would kill them or something. And Black people were not allowed to get pharmacy degrees. So it was kind of this makeshift friendship. Because so many of the pharmacists didn't speak English well, they spoke German, Nichols put together a book that's half in German and half in English. And it gives the German names for all of the plants that the pharmacists would have known before they emigrated to America. And then it gives the English name. It does not give the Southern Black names. So you need another book to kind of translate it further into what it might be called in Georgia or in North Carolina by Black folks who would have come up with another name. And their names were often based on literal translations of Native American names. So, wow. Yeah, so there's this whole thing about what's the name. Well, Mr. Nichols came up with a system whereby the action of the herb was given just a short, abbreviated code, like astr, which means astringent, which means it'll pucker up your cells and dry them up. Or it might be sud, S-U-D, which means sudophoric, it'll make you sweat copiously. Or it might be dia, which would make you diaphoretic, makes you sweat just to like glow all over your body. So these codes he added to every plant. So you could use the Nichols system if you were a pharmacist and they were cross-referenced. Oh, this person needs a laxative, LAX. You go to the laxative section, there are all the herbs. Do I have this one? No. Do I have that one? No. Oh, but here's one. Then you could go to another book like King's Dispensary and find the dosage. But the Nichols system was used in the book called This Amazing Book. They used the Nichols system of abbreviations, but they also gave what I would call the Joseph Mayer system of dosages. So Mayer felt that 90% of herbs could be used by making a tea in water. And he recommended the use of what he called safe, non-toxic herbs. And he sold them for so much a packet, 25 cents a packet. When he started later, 35 cents, later 50 cents and so forth. They got more and more. But the toxic herbs, he would not sell them loose to people. He would put them in mixes that brought them down to a non-toxic level.
Oh, okay.
Because he didn't want to be responsible for harming anybody. So you could get a laxative herb, which you could buy, but if you wanted a strong laxative for an adult, you would buy his mixture. And this is what got him called a quack. Oh, well, he's forcing you to buy his mixtures. No, he was being very responsible because he didn't want any child to take a laxative so strong it would end them in the hospital. Right? So he didn't sell some of the herbs loose. He only sold them in these blends. And so he would mix, for instance, John the Conqueror root, which is a laxative jalap root, with senna pods, which is a strong laxative, with senna leaves, which is a mild laxative, with a little psyllium husk, which is almost just a mechanical laxative. And he would make something that was a good blend. And he was famed for his blends. And those
And
blend.
that's important to know too, how to blend
Yes,
things and the right amounts.
that's right. Now, he never gave away his proportions. He gave away what the list of ingredients were, but this is where the knowledge comes in, how to make a safe, non-toxic blend of an herb that has a strong effect on the body.
Right.
Now, some of the herbs are very beneficial, and they cannot be made to be toxic, like antioxidants and so forth. But some of them might upset your stomach if you took too much. And so again, you want to be able to understand the action of these herbs. Now, there is one modern book I recommend called Prescription for Herbal Healing by Phyllis Balch. And it's a big, fat book, and it has really good pictures. For most people, the pictures are eye candy because most people are not going to go out and collect those herbs in the wild. Most people are going to buy them in dried form from a reputable herb supplier. But
That, now that's the big question.
yeah, it is.
How can you find a reputable vendor that you can trust?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let me just digress. Yeah, I got an answer for that one. Oh boy. So plants have common names. You know, we call something stinging nettle, right? It's a common name, or we call it, ancusa, or maybe we call it, Dyer's bug loss or whatever. They also have what are called taxonomic binomials. So plants are organized into families, which were originally based on the appearance of the seed bearing portion, the sexual portion. And the man who created this was called Carl Linnaeus. He was a Swede, and it's called the Linnaean system of taxonomy. And it worked very well for a long time, but it has been augmented now with DNA studies. And the taxonomies are actually being rewritten to become even more accurate now that DNA has come into play.
Wow.
But the way it worked was every plant was given a first name and a last name. And it also was given kind of its family name. So, and like Chinese names, they were in backwards order. So it wouldn't be called, for instance, Virginia snakeroot would be its common name, but its Latin name would be the Latin name for snakeroot, Virginiana. It comes from Virginia. In some cases, the Latin name is just the common name translated out, but in some cases it's not. And you learn a lot of things. Like you've heard of Damiana, right?
Yes.
Damiana is used as an aphrodisiac. And then of course the botanists say, it has some action upon the body. We don't want to talk about it. The magicians go, oh, it's magical. Put it in your mojo bag. It's magical for aphrodisiac, but it also is actually an aphrodisiac. And you can know that because its Latin name is Turnera aphrodisia. So aphrodisia is in its name. Turnera was the botanist, Mr. Turner, who, quote, discovered it. And this is a whole issue about indigenous people being left out of the Linnaean system. So Carl Linnaeus up in Sweden, he couldn't get every plant in the world, and he'd ask botanists to send him samples. And if they sent him something he'd never seen before, he would give them, quote, the honor of naming the plant after them. So like we have flowers called dahlias. They're named after a botanist named Mr. Dahl. We have a plant called a wistaria, named after a Czech botanist named Mr. Wistar. But that plant comes from China. It has a Chinese name. And there's quite a movement on the part of indigenous people to reclaim the names of their indigenous names of the plants, because why should they be named after botanists of the 1700s who were rich enough to found a ship and go off and sail and get these plants? And there's now, botanists are now working with indigenous people much more. However, these taxonomic, well, the reason, this goes to your question, these taxonomic binomials, the name of the plant, Turner aphrodisia. If someone says, I'm selling Damiana, you should be able to say them, and what are you selling? They may not be selling Turner aphrodisia. See, that's the thing. You have to ask them, particularly with American plants, what are they actually selling?
Right.
So I'm going to give you one example, and this is a plant called balm of Gilead. Now, balm of Gilead has been sold many, many years. It's usually considered to be the sticky buds of a poplar tree. Poplars are found in many parts of the world. They stick together, they're kind of gooey, not almost like sticky, like they had like a little honey on them or something like that. And balm of Gilead is used magically. You put two of them together, and if they have good stick them, they'll stick just lightly together, or you'll just bind them together, put them in a mojo for reconciliation and for love. Balm of Gilead buds. The place where we get them from primarily is Canada. There are more poplars growing in Canada than other places. So they harvest them. And if they're fresh, that year is fresh, they'll be a little sticky. If they get older, they'll collect dust and they won't be quite as sticky. You can make a salve out of them. You can do all kinds of things with them. But people began to say, hey, those things are expensive. So they began to take other plants and put them together and sell them as balm of Gilead. And this was back in the 80s. You couldn't find balm of Gilead. Well, people protested and they went back and they said, well, we've just raised the price. Now you can have them. Okay. Now, meanwhile, there was another plant called Adam and Eve root. This was an orchid that grows one little bulb at the bottom, and it sends out a little shoot, a little runner underground, and it makes a new little bulb. And the old one withers away, and the starches and proteins migrate to the new bulb, and the plant is always moving, so it gets new soil and new nutrients. But the the old one and the new one are connected, and if you dig it up, it's like you have this little wrinkly one and you have this real plump one, and they're called Adam and Eve root. And if it's really a good growing season, I'll make a third one. It's called Adam and Eve and the baby. So, and this root is used for love, just same way balm of Gilead is. So this root, however, they couldn't raise the price. It became an endangered species. So many people were digging it up. When you dig it up, you take out the two little bulbs, there's no more plant, it's gone, right? So it became protected species in the 1970s when the Endangered Species Act was passed. It's against the law to pick Adam and Eve root anywhere. Louisiana is where most of it grows. Cannot pick it. Florida, it's against the law. People still remembered it. I want Adam and Eve root. So some industrious idiot decided to make something called the new Adam and Eve root. And they took a balm of Gilead bud, because that was used the same way, and they took a little boiled peanut, a little boiled grain peanut type thing, and they put them together, and they say, well, this is the new Adam and Eve root. You go on Etsy now and look for Adam and Eve root, and you'll find these. And it's not the right thing. But to find the real Adam and Eve root, you'd have to join the Orchid Society and get someone to get you one of those little buds. And there are ways to multiply them that are secret to orchid growers. And I could tell you what they are, but I'm not going to. And you could grow them in a pot. And after a few years, you'd be able to multiply them, and then you could sell them. But the cost you would sell them at would be probably $100 a pair.
Yeah. And also too, like, orchids are just difficult to grow if you don't. I have orchid seeds that I have stashed, but they're hard to grow.
That's right. Well, some of these herbs are precious and rare, and we've multiplied humanity. We have so many people, there won't be enough of those herbs for everybody. And so we have to protect those plants from being driven into extinction by overuse. Frankincense, a very common incense, it's almost extinct now. And
wow.
Yeah, there's just too many people who want it. It only grows in certain areas in the Middle East. Myrrh is another one. And so is dragon's blood. Those are very, And another one is aloes. It's mentioned in the Bible. It's not the same as aloe vera. It's a tree called aloes tree. Aloes wood is an incense, very precious incense. It's been driven almost to extinction in Indonesia, which is where it's native to. So we have to become stewards of the earth. If we're going to be using herbs, we can't just go in and rape and pillage.
Right.
We have to also become ecologists, environmentalists.
And when you, I mean, do these, I don't know how to phrase this question, but do these things generate seeds?
Oh, good question. Not all plants reproduce by seeds.
Okay.
And some plants reproduce by runners. Some plants reproduce with spores, like mushrooms. And some plants reproduce by what's called rhizomes, like an iris plant. You can get iris seeds. They will make seeds, but the rhizome is the plant makes like little fingers that go off to the side. You break them off, and that's the same clone.
Yeah.
Seed will be different, like apples. Apple seeds never are true to the apple tree they came from. You have to clone them by grafting them to get the same apple over and over again. These are tricks known to gardeners and orchardists and herbologists. But some plants, their seeds will only open if they've been exposed to a forest fire, like some pines. And so you could plant pine seeds, all the time, and then they won't grow. But if you run a little blowtorch over them real quick, they'll pop open and they'll grow. It's really strange. And some of them will only grow if they've been in water for 2 weeks or more. And some of these sea beans, go across the ocean and wash up on the shore, and they grow where the rivers come down to the ocean. So every plant has its own way of reproducing.
Wow. So, Kat, when does your school open up?
Well, I do teach a course. I teach a course called HooDoo Rootwork Correspondence course. And I wrote a book called HooDoo Herb and Root Magic, which is about the magical sections. I have that book. Yeah. And then I did this smaller book called This Amazing Book. And it's about the medicine, and it gives you the page number in the bigger book, in the magic book, where you can find the same herb and what its magical uses are. I teach my students who turn in all their homework and graduate, they can come and take in-person apprenticeships with me. And I have taught herbalism at workshops from the Hoodoo Heritage Festival several times. And I teach my apprentices basically what we talked about just today and what you let me ramble on about. I talk to them for about 6 hours a day, and they get a crash course. They get to see the books that I'm referencing. They get to understand why this history should not be. Don't just go to Etsy and go, I'm going to learn all about this. You really want to understand the knowledge of it, and at what point the knowledge came. Was it ancient Roman knowledge? Was it 19th century chemical knowledge? Is it 20th century DNA knowledge and chemical knowledges? Herbalism as a medical system is not stuck in the past. It's always evolving, always adapting and becoming better, really. And I've given you guys some hints about where to get some good books.
Right.
I hope you follow through on them. People who listen follow through on this. There are courses online, and I know you have shown me one. It looked pretty good. Do you want to?
Yeah, I signed up for it. You get it's a certification class, and it was because there was a sale on. So it to me it was worth it. I think it was like $30 because it was marked down. And you get a certificate at the end of it.
Oh, that's good.
But it's long, and I hope I haven't started yet, but I hope that I get pictures of plants, because I have books with the drawings, and I have a wooded area out back. but I can't discern. I don't know if it's because of my eyesight, but I can't discern in the drawings to compare to the actual wild things that I have growing here.
Okay, so for you, either the Clarence Mayer books, The Herbalist, which has paintings, or
Okay.
Phyllis Balch's, it has color paintings, so they're pretty good.
Okay.
Or Phyllis Balch's Prescription for Herbal Healing, which has color photos. That would be
Okay.
really good for you.
Yeah.
I have very low vision, very bad eyesight, but there's something about your brain that takes over, and you will notice the plant will just pop out at you. You know, poof, there it is. You get it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
of the first things I teach my students, the first thing I taught my child, and the first thing my mother taught me, when you're going out to harvest wild plants, the first thing you need to know is the difference between a monocot and a dicot. So monocots are plants like an onion or a lily, agapanthus. All of the veins of the leaves run parallel, and the plant makes long single leaves like swords or something. They're called monocot. And dicots are plants in which the veins in the leaves make little vein patterns, you know.
Oh.
Okay? That is
Oh.
the biggest split in the plant family between the monocots and the dicots.
Wow.
Why it is important to know this is when you're going looking for plants, if you say, I'm looking for this and it's a dicot, all the monocots will just disappear. You won't even notice them. They won't jump out at you. But if you're looking
Yeah.
for monocots, your brain goes, oh, monocot, monocot. You'll see them, right? They'll just be right there. It's a real interesting function of your brain. And after that, you'll just narrow down further. I'm looking for things with 5 petals only, or I'm looking for things with square stems.
Right.
So to find plants, you have to learn about those. And then you'll learn about families. I'm going to give you an example. Mint family usually has a square stem, by which I mean, if you took your 2 thumbs and your 2 first fingers and put them together and made a little tiny square, you know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Tips your fingers together. That's what their stems are like. Most of them, not all, most of them are like that. But their leaves are opposite each other. They'll be north-south, and the next pair will be east-west, north-south, east-west.
Oh.
That's the mint family. They all have little flowers that look like, I have a little lower lip that hangs down. Now, all of the mint family makes fragrances, and they all make, which could say, tastes. And they use these to defend themselves against predator animals, you know, being eaten.
Wow.
But none of them have ever made a poison. That whole family is a non-poisonous family. So any mint will have some use, medical use. They might make you belch. They might flavor your tea. They're all going to do something. The mints are very, very useful. They might be cleaning or cleansing, but none of them will poison you. The mints are what are called an innocuous family. Okay, another family that will never poison you is the family of roses, except that their seeds might poison you. The family of roses, the plant, the leaf, the flower, all innocuous, but the seeds may contain cyanide.
Oh.
And so apple seeds, they're in the rose family, and so forth. Don't just save all the apple pips out of 20 apples and then eat it. You'll get real sick.
Oh.
Okay? So roses are innocuous except for their seeds. So when we look at something like a peach, the peach kernel contains cyanide. The apricot kernel contains cyanide, but the almond does not. The almond is innocuous, but it's in the same family. But you have to learn your difference between what are called almonds and bitter almonds. And bitter almonds are the ones with the cyanide. And
Okay.
so the rose family, everything is okay as long as it's leaf or flower or stem or pulp of the fruit. But be cautious about the seed. So there are others like that. And we learn these families' traits. For instance, the Solanaceae, that's the tomatoes and the deadly nightshades. Most of them are toxic. Most of them are toxic. Their leaves are toxic. Their stems are toxic. Their fruit bodies are toxic. Almost all of them. there are some exceptions. The potato is a totally toxic plant. Its seeds are toxic. Its little bulbs are, little, they're called potato fruit. It makes a little fruit like a tomato. That's toxic, but their roots are not toxic. So you can eat potatoes. But have you ever heard that when a potato turns green, you should cut the green part off?
No, I never heard that, but
Oh, you better. When you store potatoes and you expose them to light, they begin to turn green and grow those little shoots.
yeah,
Cut that out, right? You don't eat that.
I do cut the shoots off. I was
Yeah.
wondering, could I even plant them?
Yes, you can. You can cut around them and plant them. They need a little, yeah, but that's toxic. Don't eat it.
Ah,
Don't eat a green potato, and don't eat the
oh,
shoot. It's toxic.
wow.
Tomatoes, the fruit is not toxic very much. There are some things in tomatoes called leptins, which people have implicated in giving you arthritis. I don't think so much, but some people are intolerant to them. But deadly nightshade is deadly. That's why it's called deadly nightshade. So the
Wow.
Solanaceae, or the nightshades, are a very suspect family, some what we would call criminals and some upstanding members of society,
Oh,
or different parts of the plant. And every plant family has these characteristics. So I start, when I teach, by first monocots versus dicots. So let's go to monocots for a minute. The lily, the tulip, the onion, the garlic, the shallot, the acapanthus, all of those are lilies. No lily is poisonous. No lily will kill you. But some of them will upset your stomach because they make various chemicals that are either soapy, like it'll make people in the Native Americans use them to make shampoo, or they might upset your stomach. Like some people get acid reflux from onions. They can be a little strong. Garlic can be a little strong for people.
is that why it's poisonous for animal? Well, they say, but I used to give garlic to a little bit of garlic in my dogs, my shepherd's foods years ago, 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't, they both lived to be like 20 years in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how old that is in dog years.
That's a long time in dog's life, yeah.
But they were given garlic, and now all of a sudden you can't give garlic.
Well, I think it's a question of how much. Yeah. Because see, now when you talk about garlic, you're talking about garlic plant, and then they're talking about dehydrated garlic flakes and garlic powder, and all of a sudden it's concentrated. And it can upset their stomach. They say things like dogs can't eat chocolate. And yet I can tell you, we had a dog who once ate an entire chocolate cake and she didn't even get sick. Yeah. So they're trying to limit damage, but I believe that as far as humans are concerned, there are people who cannot tolerate onion, but none of them are lethal. In other words, eating onions may make you feel sick to your stomach, or may give you acid reflux, or maybe make you throw up a little bit if you're like have acid reflux to that level. But onion never killed anybody in the way that cyanide in apple pips killed somebody, or poisonous mushrooms killed somebody.
Well, Cat, it's almost time. I know you have an appointment to go
Yes,
to.
I do. Now,
I want to cry.
I know, I give 6-hour lectures on this stuff. You got to stop me.
Oh my God. God, I wish I could just take you and bottle you up and bring you home. Oh my God. It's like, I don't know. It's like when you see a person with a wealth of knowledge, and one that you can trust with this knowledge, it's like it's something sacred. Because there's so many others out there that really don't know what the hell they're talking about. They want to, and I don't think it's purposeful. But then when you're fortunate enough to run into somebody who has actually devoted a majority of their life to a subject or a study, I mean, it's like you want to just latch on and never let them go.
Oh,
And
you're so kind to me. I really appreciate that. As you long ago figured out, I don't do this for the money and I don't do it for the fame. I just have,
that's what makes it precious.
well, I do it because I have an unusually retentive memory. And as long as my memory works, the knowledge just keeps piling up, you know. I'm 74 years old and I'm still piling up more information all the time.
And willing to share.
Of course, willing to share. That's the fun of that.
And
That's the fun.
so
Well,
gosh, we're gonna have to
there's
figure
my
out.
phone. There's my phone, so I'm gonna have to go.
I love you, Cat. We'll
All
have
right.
to continue this
We'll
at
do it
another
again later.
time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Answer your phone.
All right. Bye-bye.